Chapter 4, Social Interaction in Everyday Life. A man and a woman are driving to their friend's house for dinner, and they've been searching for their friend's house. What is the man thinking and doing? What is the woman thinking and doing? Why doesn't the man ask for directions? Well, culturally, he values his independence, and he might be uncomfortable asking for help. Why does the woman want to ask for directions? Culturally, asking for help reinforces social bonds for women. Getting lost generates conflict because neither of them understands the other person's point of view. And so the central concept here is social interaction, the process by which people act and react in relation to others. Through social interaction, we create the reality we perceive. And social structure, in turn, guides our interaction. Okay, so status is a social position that an individual has, and we occupy many statuses at once. Those statuses together are called a status set. Okay, so you might be a daughter to your parents, and a sister to your brother, and a student at school, and a goalie on a soccer team. And over your lifetime, you'll gain and lose many statuses. Statuses can be ascribed or achieved. Ascribed means you have assumed it involuntarily or it's assigned to you at birth. So you're a son, you're a widow, you're a Cuban. Or it could be achieved, something you assume voluntarily that reflects some achievement and effort. Most statuses involve some combination of both. And then some statuses have such importance for our social identity and shape our entire life, and those are referred to as master statuses. This could be your occupation, your gender, a physical disability. Now, within our status, we perform roles, okay? This is behavior that is expected of us because we hold a particular status. And role set refers to all of the roles attached to a single status, okay? Now, one thing that can often happen is our roles might be experiencing conflict, right? So people in high-income nations like the United States, we juggle a lot of responsibilities, and they're often in conflict. And there's also strain, role strain, that is linked to a single status. We also can experience role exit, right? What's the process that we go through when we disengage from important social roles as we begin like a new aspect of our life? So here you can see a woman, and she's got several statuses. She's a professor, a mother, a researcher, and a wife, right? And then as a professor, she's got many different roles. She's a teacher, she's a colleague, she's an advisor, things like that, right? As a mom, she's got a maternal role, a civic role, she's a taxi driver, she's a tutor, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about social construction of reality, okay? This refers to the ability, or our ability, to do this through social interaction, right? We have considerable ability to shape what happens from moment to moment. We tend to present ourselves in terms that suit the setting, right? So like if you're going to a job interview, you're going to present yourself one way. If, you're hanging out with your family, you're going to present yourself a different way. If you're on a first date, you're going to present yourself another way, right? Our social interactions are complex negotiations of reality. One way we do this is our choice of words, right? Like how we speak to certain people varies. We might change our language. And sometimes we're very careful with our language so that people don't misinterpret us. And sometimes we're kind of careless with it. So what are street smarts, right? So street smarts, right, we often hear people talk about like, oh, someone's book smart, they're academic, and then we might hear someone talk about having street smarts, right? So sort of the ability to navigate the street or everyday life, right? So one thing we can do is we can use language, we can use how we portray ourselves to ward off violence, right? You can project an aura or an attitude or a vibe that sort of tells people not to mess with you. Now, the Thomas theorem basically says situations that are defined as real are real in their consequences. Is there this objective reality? Or if the way you say something to me comes across to me as hurtful, then it's hurtful to me. That is the reality, even if you meant it in some other way, shape, or form. Now, one way we can study this stuff is using an ethnographic or an ethnomethodology. This is the study of the way people make sense of their surroundings. And it's a good way to discover assumptions that we make, right? And one way that's really good to do this is to purposely break the rules, purposely break the norms, right? So maybe you get in an elevator and you start talking to everybody in the elevator. Or you get in the elevator, you turn and face the wall, right? We tend to greet people here in the US in a certain way, right? We're like, hey, how are you? But we don't actually mean how are you. If someone stopped and really started giving you a lot of how they are and the honest truth about how they are, you might be like, yo, dude, I was just saying hello. How we act, what we see in our surroundings depends on our interests. And our social background plays a role in this as well, as does significant events, okay? So post 9/11, which you guys are too young, well, I think you guys weren't even alive when it happened. There's a lot of heightened fear, okay? And so we build our realities from our surrounding culture. One thing that plays a big role in this is social media, right? So social media is media that allows people to communicate with one another, to share information, to form community, right? So social media is everything from TikTok to Facebook to Twitter, right? Whatever socials you're on. Some say, hey, this really has allowed us to connect with people. So like people in my generation, it's really allowed us to reconnect with people we went to high school with, people we lost touch with. You can kind of see what's going on in people's lives on Facebook or Instagram without necessarily having to do the work of keeping up with that friendship. And this is a trend that's really shaping all aspects of our lives. So I think we talked about this briefly in the previous chapter. Dramaturgical analysis looks at how we present ourselves. This is a theory by Goffman, and Goffman says that dramaturgical analysis is the study of social interaction in terms of theatrical performance, right? So your status is the part in the play and your role serves as the script, right? And so in our role, we're going to dress a certain way. We're going to carry props. Our tone of voice, our gestures, our demeanor, all of this is part of our performance, right? And we vary our performance based on where we are. So again, if you're in a job interview, right, you're going to dress up. Even if it's a job that probably doesn't require you to dress a certain way, you're going to go looking your best, right? You're going to be properly groomed. You're going to speak to this person a certain way. I don't know if any of you guys have jobs where you have to answer a phone, right? But when people talked on the phone a lot more, you'd often hear from someone like, oh, that's your phone voice, right? Like the way I would answer my phone at a job in the past would sound much more like, hello, Big Brothers, this is Meredith Spencer, right? As opposed to like when you pick up the phone and it's a friend and you know who it is and you're like, hey, what's up? Some of our communication is nonverbal. Actually, a lot of our communication is nonverbal. This is part of where texting gets us in trouble, right? There's no tone, there's no facial expressions, there's no body language, right? So facial expressions are probably the key one, right? So everything from smiling to rolling your eyes and sticking out your tongue. Like during COVID, when everybody was wearing masks, it was kind of hard to know what was going on with people. We don't see anybody smiling, right? Hand gestures, eye contact, right? When we expect people in our culture to make eye contact when they're speaking with us, right? We all know what it means if you give someone the finger, that sends a message too, right? And sometimes we're saying one thing and our body language is giving us away. So I probably still do this. And for those of you that have had me before, I guess you can weigh in on this. But I used to roll my eyes constantly. And my mom would be like, stop rolling your eyes. I think I've gotten better at this, but I also know some other people who it's like your face is giving you away, right? So sometimes our unintended body language kind of gives us away, right? Now, ideally, we can use this sometimes to detect if someone's being deceitful with us, but not always, right? Many people who will tell you like they're a human lie detector and they're so good at this are not actually super good at it. And some people are super good at lying, right? But for many of us, and especially for people you know very well, you can probably tell if they're lying, right? So when my youngest brother's 20 years younger than me, when he was little growing up, sometimes he'd lie about something, you know, like, no, I didn't skip school, or no, I didn't do this. And he was a terrible liar. He would crack a smile, like he couldn't keep a straight face. And I can remember saying to him, like, dude, stop lying because you suck at it, right? Like, you're not even good at it. Now, I'm sure for my mom, this was, you know, great because she could catch him in lies, but not very good for him. Gender plays a role in our performance too, right? Everything from like what's our demeanor, what's our attitude can give us clues about how much social power someone has, right? We generally expect women to be polite, to be helpful. How we use space, right? The more power you have, the more space you tend to use. Women are often judged for how little space we take up, right? We're expected to be dainty. Think about if you've ridden the T, right? Women often cross their legs. They don't take up extra space. Men often man spread, right? And take up a lot of space. Men often intrude into women's space. When women intrude into men's space, right? Then men often think like, oh, she's flirting with me, right? And because that can be perceived as a sexual overture, it often, quote unquote, keeps women in their place. Everything from staring, smiling, touching, right? Like staring usually makes you feel creeped out if someone's been staring at you, right? Touching. Some people are very touchy-feely, some aren't. Some want to hug when they greet people, some do not. Some really don't want you to touch them. Now, also, we tend to construct our performance to idealize our intentions, right? We generally want to make ourselves look good. So when you're in that job interview, maybe they tell you something about the job you don't really like, but you're not like, dude, that sucks. Forget it. Peace out. I don't want this job, right? We present ourselves the best way possible, right? Think about what I like to call first date behavior, and I don't know if your generation really goes on dates anymore, right? But think about maybe when you're newly in a relationship with someone. You're trying to impress them, right? We dress a little better. We behave a little better. We don't burp in front of people, right? We're like brushing our teeth all the time in case we get to kiss, right? Maybe we're chewing some gum so our breath is fresh. Once you've been with someone for a longer period of time, right, you're not putting in that same level of effort, right? You're just not. You're not trying to impress people as much anymore. We often don't admit to our less honorable motives, right? So sometimes we're doing something for money, for power, for prestige. And it's not that those are bad reasons to do something, right? But we often sort of present ourselves in the best light possible, or we try to, right? And this idealization is part of being civil, right? We smile and make polite remarks to those we hate, right? We don't, every time we see someone we dislike, we don't go up to them and we're like, yo, I hate you. Yo, I hate you too, right? We behave civilly, generally speaking. Now, when we have misperformed, when we've messed something up, said something we wish we didn't say, we get embarrassed, right? We have lost face. Sometimes you relive that embarrassment. I'm sure you've all had the experience of sitting at home. You might remember something you did 5-10 years ago, and you literally feel the embarrassment all over again, right? Now, when we're engaged in this idealized performance, some of that is deceitful, right? Like we're not always being completely honest, right? And it means we have to juggle a lot of stuff when we're trying to present ourselves in the best way possible. Now, audiences, people looking on, maybe you did say something like that you should be embarrassed about is a little stupid. Generally speaking, your audience, the people who've heard it, will be like, no, don't worry about it, right? They respond with tact, right? We help someone save face. We don't want them to be embarrassed. We often feel secondhand embarrassment, right? And we don't want other people to feel that. Now, sometimes somebody says something really out of pocket and you're completely comfortable with them being embarrassed. You want them to be embarrassed, You want them to sit in that feeling. But for the most part, right, somebody tells you they just did something and they're so embarrassed, you're like, oh, no big deal. Nobody probably even noticed. Okay, so let's think about some interactions in everyday life. And let's start with emotions. Feelings. Sometimes they're great. Sometimes we wish we didn't have them. So often what we do matters less than how we feel, right? Emotions do have a biological side. There's 6 basic emotions expressed by everyone, everywhere, in every culture. Happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, and surprise. And you would be able to recognize that on someone's face in any culture, okay? It's good that we can recognize this. It supports group life, right? Like it's good for us to know when someone's angry at us. Maybe we did something we shouldn't have done. If someone's sad, right, it means we can reach out to them. Are you okay? Can you do anything to support them, right? But there's also a cultural side that guides our emotions as well. It defines what triggers an emotion, right? It gives us the rules for when and where and how to display it. So think about sadness. We all experience sadness, right? But women in our culture are very much encouraged to cry. Sometimes women aren't even crying and someone's like, it's okay, let it all out, right? Little girl and a little boy both fall, they both cut up their knees, right? It's gross, it's yucky, it hurts. We're often like, it's okay to the little girl. Cry, it's okay, right? But to the little boy, we might let him like be upset for a minute and then we're like, be a man, stop it, right? Things like when you feel emotional on the job, right? It's generally not good at work to be letting people see your emotions. Maybe you're feeling hella anxious, but you don't want your boss to see that. Maybe your feelings are big hurt and you don't want anybody to see that either. Usually we're a little freer with our emotions at home. Usually we're a little freer with our emotions with the people we're closest to, right? Okay, language, right? So language defines men and women differently in terms of power and value. Even if you think about language, right? Like in a lot of languages, some nouns are feminine, some nouns are masculine, right? Men often call things that they possess and own she, right? So like a boat is a she. They might call their car a she, right? It denotes some ownership. When women get married, this is a trend that has changed a lot, but generally women would get married and they would take their husband's last name. I think that's happening less and less. I don't have any statistics on that, but just what I've seen happen, I see fewer and fewer people doing that. Also, I think the older a woman is when she gets married, right, she's more married to that identity, right? So like my last name is Spencer. I'm not married. If I got married now, Spencer's been my last name for 50 some odd years. I don't know that I would want to change that. It's a big part of my identity, right? The English language treats things that have greater value, force, and significance as masculine. So think of something like the word virtuous. Now this derives from a Latin word, but it derives from a Latin word that means man, and virtuous means excellent and morally worthy, right? Even think about when we use words in a negative way with people, right? Like we might tell someone they run like a girl, right? That's meant to be an insult, right? Or they play like a girl, or they throw like a girl. We can also use language and emotions in our humor, right? So humor arises as we compare and contrast different realities, right? One often conventional and one often unconventional. And the humor arises from like that contradiction. Like what makes sarcasm funny for most people, right? Is that like, you know, it's pouring rain and you're soaking wet and you're like, the weather's beautiful today, right? It's funny because it's a juxtaposition. But humor has some different dynamics to it, right? So one part is getting it. To get the joke, you have to know the culture, right? If we all went on a trip at the end of the semester and we went to, I don't know, Russia, and even if we spoke Russian or people spoke English to us, they'd probably tell some jokes that would just go right over our heads. Like we wouldn't understand the culture, we wouldn't understand the context, it wouldn't make any sense to us, right? Humor has the power to distress, right? It can make us feel so much better. Laughter, right? When my niece was little, sometimes I would lay down with her while she was going to bed, and sometimes she'd hop on YouTube and look at these compilations of like Vine videos, right? And some of them are so funny, and we would sit there and just like laugh so hard that your stomach hurts. And it genuinely makes you feel better, right? Like you're in a better mood afterwards, right? It can also be a safety valve. Something feels tense, and people might crack a joke to lighten the air, right? To relieve tension. But we also use humor to subjugate other people, right? So there's a lot of humor, and this has changed over time, but a lot of jokes that are meant to kind of be like, hey, I'm a person who has more power than you, right? So a lot of humor that has to do with like ethnicity or race. But humor is a means of escape, right?